Today I want to talk about something a little more personal. Hi guys, it's Amanda with Eat, Pray, Crunch, and today I want to talk about something a little more personal. October is Pregnancy Loss and Infant Loss Awareness Month. So I feel like this month would be the perfect opportunity to talk about my experience with that. I really appreciate that they have that as an awareness month now, because it is so common. The statistic is that 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. 1 in 4. So that means that if you yourself have not experienced that, then guaranteed multiple people in your life have. Yet even though it is that common, it just really isn't talked about that much. I feel like it is starting to change a little, that people are just more open in general than they used to be. But even historically, like in generations past, like it just was not discussed. And people suffered all of this in silence. And what an isolating experience. And it just so happens that that is one of the struggles that me and Bill have experienced. I've mentioned this in videos before, but I haven't really told the story before. So I figured what a golden opportunity to do it this month of all months. I'm not going to tell my whole infertility story here because I already have an entire playlist on that I will link here in the cards. And I encourage you to go over and watch our infertility story because that was a huge trial that we went through in our lives. So I'm not going to go into all the details about the infertility story, but it's related to my story now. So be sure to go over and watch that. Long story short, we were dealing with male factor infertility, and we were basically told that we had like a 1% chance of conceiving on our own. And we ultimately ended up doing IVF, and we had even transferred 2 embryos, and that IVF failed. And it wasn't loss per se going through infertility, but it's still grief. So we had already experienced a lot of grief surrounding our infertility. I talk all about my emotions, everything in my playlist, so be sure to check that out. But then to have our IVF fail, like that felt like our first real encounter with loss per se, because we knew that there were 2 embryos in there and that they just didn't take, or they took and didn't last very long, or whatever the reason was that it didn't work. We lost those 2 embryos. You know, even though I wasn't even technically pregnant with that, it was still a loss to us. Just considering the journey that had led us up to that point with our infertility, just to lose those embryos was like a slap in the face. It caused us, especially me, to have like a very real spiritual crisis. Then, I mean, we all know that there was a happy ending here. We miraculously got pregnant with my son after that. And I did a whole video talking about how that happened, and I will link that in the cards here. After my son was about 9 months old, we decided that we were ready to start trying again. And the reason we were wanting to start when he was so young was that we knew our infertility history, and we just wanted to give ourselves that much margin. We didn't know how long it was going to take us to get pregnant the second time. And so we figured, you know, if our son was 9 months, then our kids would at least be 18 months apart, which is about the minimum we wanted for an age gap, which we highly doubted it would happen that first month anyway. Well, guess what? We got pregnant the first, or was it the second? It might have been the second month we tried. We were shocked. I'll have that whole story linked here as well. But we had actually changed our diet to a traditional real food diet, and for other reasons, but that inadvertently healed our problem. It's truly a miracle. And we were so happy, we were so joyful. Like, we knew that, you know, this baby and my son were going to be like 19 months apart. And I was actually excited to have kids close in age, even though I knew it was going to be hard. We were starting to get really excited. But then around 6 weeks, maybe a little bit before, maybe like a day or 2 before 6 weeks, I started having some cramping and started having some spotting. And, you know, we had told our parents at this point and a couple of friends, but that was it. And so they had me go in for an ultrasound. And it turned out that they couldn't even find a sac. I was 6 weeks, so they would at least at 6 weeks be able to see like a sac, even if they couldn't see much else in an ultrasound. But they went for a long time looking around, trying to find something, and there was nothing. What had happened was either that I had already passed the tissue, or it was this certain kind of pregnancy. I can't even remember what the term was now. It was like a blighted ovum. Is that what it was? I can't remember exactly what it was. They didn't know for sure. But I had positive pregnancy tests, like, and it had been getting darker for a while. Me being the obsessive pee on a stick person that I was, I did notice that the few days leading up to that, it started getting lighter again. So we'll never know for sure what happened with that pregnancy, but that was definitely our second encounter with pregnancy loss. We went through a lot of grief surrounding that. Now, granted, we had our son at that point, and I think that it didn't make it easy, but it made it easier. I've heard so many heartbreaking stories of people like us who had gone through infertility and then go on to get pregnant, and then before they even carry a baby to term, they have a miscarriage the first time they get pregnant. It just stabbed me in the heart. It's terrible. I know that already having my son, like, we felt like if he is the only child we ever get, we are thankful. We are thankful that we at least have one child. That's all we asked for. We got one child. I think that helped soften the blow a little bit, but it was still hard because we really wanted to have a sibling for our son. You know, that day that we did the ultrasound, even like during the ultrasound, I started bleeding really, really heavily. And we just had to get through that grief, and we really wanted to keep trying after that because, like, for one, we knew now that we were capable of getting pregnant on our own and that our infertility problem was actually like measurably solved. And so we knew that it was like it wouldn't be entirely in vain if we kept trying because we knew it could happen. And two, after having a loss, I think it just makes you want it even more. Those of you who have gone through loss before, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, that once you have experienced that loss, it just makes you want that baby that much more. So we kept trying. They said take a month off. So we did. And we tried again, and the very first month we tried, we got pregnant again. Like, this is a 180. I mean, it truly was miraculous that our infertility problem was like completely solved, and like first or second try each time we were getting pregnant. It was amazing. So that was a silver lining in all of this. And that one ended up being a chemical pregnancy, which a lot of people wouldn't even know they were pregnant to begin with, because it's basically like you start your period, you know, within days of when you normally would. Most people would just think it was a late period. But since I was an obsessive peeing on a stick girl, I knew, and I was tracking it. You know, we were doing all the charting and everything, and I was highly hyper aware of my cycle. And so I tested early even and got positive. So I knew for like I think I got a positive pregnancy test for like 5 days, and just like the other one, it started getting lighter and lighter again. And then I just started bleeding, like, I think it was like 3 or 4 days after my period was due. I know in that kind of situation, it's likely because there's some sort of major chromosomal abnormality, and probably for the best. It's just so hard to think about at the time, but it probably is for the best. That doesn't make it any easier, especially considering we had just had a miscarriage like 2 months prior, and here we were having another one. Even though in the medical world they don't even count that as full-blown miscarriage, they just call it a chemical pregnancy. So that was loss number 3. And then we decided we just needed to take a break from it for a while. It was just too much emotionally going on. And at that time we were in the process of like fixing up our house and selling it and moving. So it was just a lot, like too much going on. So we're like, okay, we're just gonna wait until we move, then we'll try again. So the very first month that we were in this house, we tried again, and bam, first try again, we got pregnant. Like, I'm telling you guys, being this way literally changed our lives. We went from thinking that there was a very real possibility that we would not be able to have our own kids to getting pregnant 3 times in a row. So that was a huge silver lining, that like we knew that we had healed our problem. So that was amazing. So this time things were looking a little better. I was tracking my pregnancy lines again, and unlike the last 2 pregnancies, these ones were consistently getting like way darker, way darker. And because I had had 2 miscarriages prior, I immediately went to my primary care doctor and asked her, can you please put me on progesterone? It will just give me peace of mind. I know that it was an issue that I had with my son before, and the fact that I had 2 miscarriages, I feel like let's cover all of our bases. Please put me on progesterone. I was just like, I need my baby to live, and I need to do everything that I can do in my control. I mean, beyond that, it's in God's hands, but I felt like I needed to do everything I could in my control. So she was happy to put me on progesterone, which I went on, and she was also happy to do like beta tests for me, testing my HCG levels like every 2 days, and they were like more than doubling. Like, they were looking awesome. So as you guys know, that pregnancy had a happy ending. That was our daughter Sophie, but we had a very scary close encounter with her. When I was 11 weeks pregnant with Sophie, we thought things were going really well, and I was in 11 weeks, so I felt like, you know, I was even like 11 and a half weeks, so I was almost at that like 12-week cutoff, you know, the end of the first trimester, when you feel like you're in the safe zone, right? And one night I sat down at my computer. All right, if you don't want graphic details about pregnancy related things, just turn this video off right now, because I'm going to be very real about this. But I had this huge gush of blood suddenly out of nowhere. It was huge. It just stopped me in my tracks, and it was really alarming. Like, I wasn't even expecting, I wasn't even having like any sort of like miscarriage like symptoms. Like, I still felt pregnant, but all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I am losing my baby right now. And I was convinced that was what was happening, and I was terrified, because I was like, I can't do this a 3rd time in a row. And ultimately we ended up going to the ER that night. Thankfully it happened when my husband was home and when my mother-in-law was over here, so she was able to stay with Alex because he was already asleep for the night. Thank God. I feel like that was like a God thing. The circumstances worked out that way, because my husband was able to take me to the emergency room that night, and they did an ultrasound, and there was beautiful little Sophie in there, moving all around, strong heartbeat, and ultimately they found out the source of the bleeding was a huge subchorionic hematoma, or hemorrhage, and they measured it, and it was basically like a huge pool of blood between the gestational sac and the uterine wall that was 10 centimeters long. I mean, we're talking, that's like that much. That's huge. It was bigger than the gestational sac. There was more blood in my uterus than there was baby and fluid. It was alarming, and they basically told me that there was a 50-50 chance that I could miscarry at that point. I get a little emotional talking about it. I just remember Bill and I sitting in the emergency room, and we were both just silent in prayer. Like, we were both praying so hard, like, please God, don't let this happen again. Please protect this baby. Whew. Pull it together. So ultimately, long story short, I ended up going on modified bed rest for 2 whole months. The doctors were saying I could do a little more activity than that, but you know, we had done some reading on research saying that bed rest actually did help in this kind of circumstance. And so we decided that, once again, we needed to do everything that was in our control to keep our baby safe. We ended up basically having me on modified bed rest. So I went to see a perinatologist, I think it was even like every 3 weeks for a while during those 2 months. and they were constantly measuring that hematoma to make sure that it was shrinking. Having a hematoma is actually pretty common. Most people have them much smaller. This is why they say it's common to have bleeding early in your pregnancy. As long as you're not having cramping and miscarriage symptoms, it actually is pretty common. But mine was significantly bigger than the average hematoma. And because it put pressure on the uterus and on the sac, that's what made the possibility of miscarriage so real. The darn thing did end up shrinking. We were praying constantly about this, and thank you, God. Oh my gosh. I felt like we came this close to having a fourth loss. It was a hard time. I'm not gonna lie. Being on bed rest, especially being cooped up in bed rest and not leaving your house or even leaving your bed very much, like all you can do is dwell on it, right? Let's be real. I watched a lot of Netflix, but you know, I spent a lot of time just dwelling on it and stewing in it, and it was hard. Just constantly sitting there thinking about like this possibility that I might lose my baby. Thank God that our little Sophie was able to pull through, and we thank God every day that the hematoma shrunk and that she went on to go to full term. I mean, I remember getting to the point of viability and just, you know, 24 weeks or whatever it is, and just feeling this sense of relief. Not that it would be good if she was born that early, but I just felt like at least there would be a chance if something happened. Then she went on to full term, and she was healthy, happy, amazing little girl. And sometimes, you know, like in the daily grind of having kids, like it, you know, being a parent of small kids is hard too. It's hard. You know, I remember going through infertility and facing this possibility of loss, thinking I am never going to take my kids for granted, and I don't. That doesn't make parenting any less hard, but it has given me this perspective now. Kind of the silver lining in all of this is that I am so grateful for my kids. They are both miracles. They are both miracles. And I mean, every once in a while, you know, like I said, in the daily grind, you forget that sometimes, but every once in a while, Bill and I are reminded of this journey that we have gone through to have our two children, and we just thank God. Like, they are miracles. Sorry, I was not expecting to get emotional. Like, I've talked about this story so many times before with people, and I was not expecting that I was going to be crying on this video. Anyway, it's real. It's genuine. Our children are blessings, and I'm so thankful that we have the ones that we have. All of this is to say that pregnancy and infant loss it's horrible. It's a horrible, terrible thing that people are dealing with on a daily basis, and likely somebody you know right now is experiencing that. And I just wanted to make this video just to tell my story, and just for the sake of making it a little less taboo. I think that the more people talk about it, the less taboo it is. And I think the reason partially why it's so taboo is because obviously it's painful. It's painful to talk about. Honestly, I haven't been fully comfortable telling this story until now, 2 or 3 years later. At the time, I wouldn't have felt comfortable talking about it the way I'm talking about it now. There's been enough time and distance from it that I can now, but I totally understand why it's hard for people to talk about. And I have like a respect and reverence about that as well. I just want to say I encourage you that if this is something that you have gone through, or you know somebody who's going through it, you know, share this video with them. Share your stories in the comments down below if you are comfortable doing so. For nothing else, just to tell somebody else who is going through it, even if you're going through this silently right now, just know that you're not alone. There are so many people, myself included, who know what that is about and the pain and the grief that comes with that. You know, everybody's story is different. Not everybody has the same kind of emotional response to it. I do feel now that there has been some distance from it. I don't feel that sense of loss on a daily basis like I did at first. You know, I have my beautiful children now, and I have them to focus on. Putting all my energies into them these days. And so it's not something that I think about on a regular basis at this point. but I do think about it sometimes. It is a part of who I am and our story, and it has gotten us to where we are now, and it will always be a part of me. I know some women really feel a sense of connection with the babies that they lost and others don't. I felt like my miscarriages were early enough that I didn't really start to feel that really strong sense of bonding with the baby, and I think that partially made it easier. Heaven forbid anything would have happened with my pregnancy with Sophie. I know it would have been a lot harder had it happened after the first trimester. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And the later you go in pregnancy, the harder it gets. I know a number of people who have gone all the way through pregnancy and then have had stillbirth or infant loss soon after birth, and I can't even imagine. All of this is to say, my heart goes out to all of you who have been through something like this. Please let me know if you need prayer, because I would love to pray for you if this is something you are struggling with. That is my story, and I hope that, you know, maybe it makes you feel less alone if you have gone through it or are going through it. If you haven't gone through it, thank the Lord God Almighty. I pray that you never have to experience that. And I hope that this just helps raise awareness of it a little bit more. You know, even though people are aware that it happens, I think that actually telling our stories makes it a little more real, you know? So that is all I have to say about that. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.